Thanks, Nico. I sharing with all the thanks that Nico has said. I only add one name, which is Nico. He has been a marvelous co-organizer and indispensable to to organize all these events. And so,
Be interactive here and just say that Riccardo has carried the heavier burden. That's all.
we have learned perfectly how we are substituted, how we are complements to each other, and it works perfectly. So thanks for being here. Thanks for accepting our invitations. It is really a joy to have you all here today. So the title is How to Make the Green Transition Happen. And as Nico said, the key to this event, we would like to be interaction. And interaction requires sometimes a little bit of provocation. So let me just try to give you some hints in this direction. There is a lot that we must know before we can even pose this question, how can we make the green transition happen? But we're not going to discuss this before here. We know about rising CO2 emissions. We know about rising temperatures. We got the bad news yesterday or 2 days ago from Copernicus about that. We know that it's already late, not too late, but late to start mitigating. Nevertheless, we know we still need to decarbonize. And I guess most of us also believe that renewable-based energy transition is the key, the only realistic key to achieve decarbonization in a reasonable span of time. We know all this, and we're not here to discuss particularly this. It's our background. If you're here, it is because we want to discuss the why and what, why it's not happening and what to do to make it happen. Why are we going too slow? Is it something or somebody who is slowing down the green transition? I will not enter into the details of policies. This will be the task of some of the speakers later on. However, I would like to pose a question from a slightly different perspective. Does the green transition have intellectual adversaries? Well, I think the answer is yes. There are at least 4 intellectual adversaries against which we must compete. And in mentioning all 4 of them, I will be sticking my neck out a little bit. I think you might not all agree on this list. So, on the first adversary, however, we all agree. This advance. It's climate denialism. There are several brands of denialism, essentially driven by ignorance or by identity politicking. And both of these are often exploited by vested interests. It is quite dangerous. Negationism is quite dangerous and can reach up to the high level of political power. The most developed example I know of this is called Project 2025. It is the presidential transition project promoted in the USA by the Heritage Foundation. It is a very articulated, very competently written, 920 pages long, detailed agenda for the next conservative Republican US president. Just a revealing quote. In the name of combating climate change, policies have been used to create an artificial energy scarcity that will require trillions of dollars in new investment, supported with taxpayer subsidies to address a problem, quotation marks, that only government and special interests themselves have created. The result has been increased energy costs. End of quotation. I hope I will not comment this quote. It's, I think, self-explanatory. And I could continue endlessly with any similar quotation in this report, but obviously I will not. Just to say that these policy prescriptions give me goosebumps, and I guess many of you have been feeling the same way now. The second intellectual adversary is on the opposite side. the first was the north, this is the south side. It is those who believe that to decarbonize, we must give up on economic growth and turn into the opposite direction. Some of you will discuss these theses. Alessio, are you here? No, not yet. He will arrive. He has written a powerful book against this ideology, and we will talk about it tomorrow. Let me only summarize it this way. Degrowth would not solve the problem. It would be economically disruptive and socially and politically unacceptable. But mostly, it is not necessary. We can do much better. So, the third intellectual anniversary is quite close to us. Possibly is also here within this room. I said I was going to stick a little bit my neck out. It is the pure neoclassical economist. She or he thinks that a set of Pigouvian taxes and subsidies is all that is required to steer the economy towards the green transition. The visible hand would take care of the rest. Maybe if we had the time to wait and see, but we do not. Now, researchers know quite well that there are many caveats to this theoretical primacy of carbon pricing. Essentially, there are constraints such that the first best efficient outcome cannot be achieved. Then policy prescriptions become messier, more context dependent. And perhaps let me suggest that economists have emphasized too much a simple, elegant solution of carbon pricing in their teaching and often also in their public communication. Let's think just a second about this. Pigouvian taxes shift consumers and producers' choices among existing alternatives. They're quite efficient in doing this. But the green transition is not about choosing apples versus pears or vice versa. It is about discovering new technologies and using them to change the way we obtain our fundamental factor of production, which, and the neoclassical economists will really now get angry at me, the fundamental factor of production, which is not labor, nor capital, not even land, it is energy in its most elusive forms, but it's everywhere. So we need a paradigmatic change in how we collect our energy, how we store it, how we distribute it, and how we use it. This change requires an enormous amount of directed or coordinated research and investments and policies like targeted subsidies, standards, bans, and especially requires a capacity and credibility to commit to those policies over a long horizon. This certainly includes, but goes quite beyond the mere taxation of externalities. I conclude on this point. Rick Van Ploy keynote, which would have been tomorrow, would have gone much more competently and deeply and impressively in the way to systematize our dissatisfaction with mainstream economics and economic policy paradigms. Unfortunately, I must say, Rick just had a sort of not too bad an accident that doesn't allow him to travel, so we will lose his keynote tomorrow. The fourth adversary. I got the idea about this fourth adversary when talking with a colleague who could not be here, Francesco Mongelli. I'm not implicating him. He might express his idea differently from how I do it here, but I got the stimulus from him. The IPCC has taught us to think of mitigation and adaptation as almost parallel pathways, something that goes hand in hand. And of course, logically and optimally, they should be so. They should go together. But also in practice, if we think in terms of scarce resources, then the question arises, is it more urgent to adapt or to mitigate? To the populist politician, of which we see some around, as extreme climate events get worse and more frequent, the answer will be clear. Why waste funds on mitigation policies that might bring benefits, if ever, only in the distant future? As people suffer, the easiest policy choice is to compensate those who have suffered damages immediately. With populism in power, this might well become the only climate policy pursued. It would be extremely myopic, but still become quite popular. We must be clear that adaptation, even if necessary, is always local, immediate, and insufficient. On the contrary, mitigation can be optimal, but it is difficult because it requires a long-term perspective and global cooperation. In a time when inward-turning populist nationalism is on the rise and global cooperation is turning into non-cooperation on many policy areas, those favoring rational policymaking have a challenge ahead of them. So, to conclude, we have powerful intellectual adversaries. And the competition is made harder since, at least in part, we are advocates of unproven solutions. That's why we'd better come up soon with well-thought, consistent, implementable policy solutions. These policies are varied, but they must share a common element. They're all aimed towards the future. They must be consistently supported and implemented over the longest horizon. For this reason, it is very appropriate that we begin this workshop with a lecture on the value of the future. Your participants, it is, once upon a time I would have said ladies and gentlemen, but more. Your participants, it is my great pleasure today to introduce our first speaker and keynote lecturer, Mr. Daniele Franco. Daniele, if you would like to take the floor.